Is Final Fantasy X-2 in 2024 worth playing? Maybe, but not really for me. The battle system is great and the soundtrack's wonderful, but man does this game have a ton of issues. I really enjoyed battling this game and I even kind of like the tone, but for the most part this was pretty painful to get through. But there are some redeeming qualities, so let's talk about it. Plot, tone, and story. No major spoilers. So this is a direct sequel to Final Fantasy X, and it takes place after the events of Final Fantasy X with Yuna, Riku, and a new character, Pain. After Riku finds a sphere that shows a character that resembles Tidus on it, the three women form a group of sphere hunters called Gullwings, where they travel throughout the world of Spira to find various different spheres to find out more information about this mysterious character. This is the general plot of the game, and the story is very weird and complex, which I'll discuss a little bit later in the spoiler section. But as a plot, this is a decent premise. However, the tone and the introduction to this plot is probably where a lot of people will fall off this game. The introduction here is really jarring. I'm sure that almost everybody that played this back when it was first released was like, what in the Blackpink New Jeans 50/50 is this? This game starts you off as Yuna, Riku, and Pain, as I previously mentioned, and essentially they're having an idol concert in a stadium, and it's super extravagant and over the top, about as far opposite as you can go from Final Fantasy X's opening, really. And then you quickly find out that this is not Yuna, and it's actually somebody posing as her in a dress sphere, which is a new mechanic I'll talk about here in a minute, that she stole from Yuna. You then chase her down with Yuna and the gang, you take out her syndicate soldiers, and then you take the dress sphere back. This acts as the introduction to the game and the combat system as a whole, and is really eccentric and very silly, and does a pretty good job of setting the tone of the game. And as far as the tone is concerned, you either really like it or you really don't. For me, this beginning section of the game here just didn't really hook me, so I didn't really have much of an opinion one way or another. However, I did come to enjoy the tone a little bit later on, so I don't think that's a negative part of this game, but it's more the delivery of the story and basically all of its aspects that are my main problem with this game. In my opinion, this game is written and voice acted pretty terribly in the English dub. I know the Japanese voice acting may be significantly better, but I like playing my games in English when it's available, and especially when it's marketed towards a Western audience. Granted, with a poor script, it's pretty hard to have good voice acting, but nonetheless, the voice acting was really pretty bad for the most part throughout the entire game. There are numerous instances where the voice lines just make either no sense or just really dumb, and it just kind of takes you out of the experience as a whole because of how jarring all this is. Again, the tone's more goofy, happy, and carefree, which at times the game nails, but majority of the time, and even with some of the characters that really do a good job at times, these voice lines are just really bad and like executed terribly. I know I'm kind of going hard on this, but I do honestly like the idea of the tone here. One of my favorite movies is Too Fast, Too Furious, and that's really dumb, but I think it's dumb and fun. Here, I just think it's dumb and bad. But at times there is some dumb fun, but I mean really it's only like 10% of the game. But all of this would be ignorable if the gameplay is good and the battle system is good and everything like that. And thankfully the battle system is good, however, I think the gameplay is actually pretty bad. So let's talk about that. The non-battle system gameplay. So again, I think the battle system for this game is great, and I'll talk more about that in detail later on, but all the stuff that you do outside of battling and around it is just really not fun or enjoyable at all, with the exceptions of like one or two mini games or sections. And these non-battle sections actually make up majority of what you're doing, like vast majority of what you're doing throughout the game. Therefore, I don't think that Final Fantasy X-2 lets the excellence of its battle system shine as much as it should. But again, we'll get into that a little bit later. But a good question is, what does this game actually have you doing most of the time then? Well, kind of a bit of everything. But first, let me explain how the game functions. The game reuses a lot of main areas from Final Fantasy X, and pretty much all of the areas are open to you after the tutorial section. And you can explore all these areas, but there are certain areas that are hotspots, which are the mandatory missions that you have to complete in order to progress the game. After you complete the hotspots, more hotspots will either pop up or you'll pass through the chapter. There's 5 chapters in total. But once you complete a chapter, a lot of the content from that chapter may be permanently locked away because it's isolated to that chapter. Therefore, it kind of sets up like a gameplay loop of if there's content within a chapter that you want to do before completing the main hotspots, you should probably go do that and then complete the hotspots. As an idea, I think this could work pretty well. But again, like the story and the tone, the way that they did it here, I just don't think it works very well. And really, it's for various different reasons that I'll kind of bring up throughout the video. But for now, let's stick to the gameplay and why it also contributes to the formula not working very well. Again, in every chapter, you'll have access to all the areas. And in order to progress, you have to complete the hotspots, which account for very few areas. However, you really should visit all the areas because there's gated content behind these areas that do get permanently locked away, as I previously mentioned. The issue here is that the other areas is the entire world pretty much of Final Fantasy X. And there's certain items and quests and useful equipment that is just locked away in obscure places or behind pretty difficult minigames. And again, most of this is really all not fun. But speaking of minigames, Final Fantasy X-2 is all about minigames. And in fact, that's primarily what you'll be doing through most missions. Granted, they're mostly individual minigames, so like they're all different, but there's a lot of them. And some of them have very in-depth mechanics, but some of them are extremely shallow. But I found like maybe 1 or 2 out of 17 to be enjoyable. A lot of the ones that weren't enjoyable, they did have a lot of potential, but ultimately fell short, in my opinion. But again, most were really not fun, and I found myself completing them just to move the story along and get the extra content. Almost every time I had to do them, it kind of felt like a chore. Again, each mission is actually vastly different from the previous one and has its own special rules or gameplay that is unique to it, which is definitely interesting. But some examples of this, there's one mission where you have to match up 12 different monkey pairs as couples with the right partner, and the hint to which monkey goes with which is based off their names. While there's another mini game that's actually a number game, and it's essentially just find the greatest multiple of a number and beat the opponent before the time runs out. This was actually kind of fun. I'll bring this up a little bit later. And again, there's 17 mini games, probably a handful of pseudo mini games. But again, by far, most of them are annoying and unfun. On top of this, there's areas or situations in the game that require you to do something or several somethings in order to progress or get access to side content, and it's just really poorly explained, or either very unintuitive or extremely obscure, and you'll spend most of the time trying to figure out what to do versus actually doing it. There were several sections in the game where all I needed to do was interact with something on a wall that was extremely obscure, or talk to NPCs in a certain order, or etc. And without a guide, this would be miserable. And honestly, I passed through most of them through sheer dumb luck, and after a while I just started looking up a guide because it was just getting miserable. A great example of like a really unintuitive quest that you have to do is where you have to collect disguises in order to infiltrate an enemy lair. And in my experience with this section, I first went to the enemy lair because it was a hot spot, so I just wanted to check it out. I couldn't get into it, so I knew I had to get something else. I didn't really know what I had to get, but I had to get something else. So I started exploring the other various locations throughout the world, the non-hotspot areas, and I happened to run across a section where I could steal an outfit from one of the soldiers from the syndicate that's within that lair. But it's presented to you that you actually stole, or Yuna's group actually stole several outfits because there's a couple of soldiers relaxing in a hot spring, and you take advantage of that situation and take their stuff. However, after stealing the uniform, I went back to the lair and nothing had changed. So I went to a few other areas and I couldn't find anything else. And again, I thought I already had enough outfits, so I thought I had to go get something else in order to get in there, like maybe a badge or something like that. So after a while, probably like an hour or so, I just decided, screw it, I'm looking up a guide. And what I found out is I had to find 2 more outfits because I only picked up 1 outfit in the first go round, so the other 2 main characters needed an outfit as well. On my way to get the second one, I had to run into another frustrating area where I got stuck, and I had to look up a guide to get through that one as well. There are so many sections like this throughout this game, and without looking up a guide, I don't know how you get through the game without just sheer dumb luck or just really exploring and interacting with every single thing. Up till this point, I kind of did everything blind, but after this, I just said, screw it, I'm gonna look up a guide anytime I run into trouble. To me, this is not good game design. Puzzles or progression paths should be relatively intuitive, or at the very least give you hints at where you should go or what you might need to finish a puzzle. To me, you need a guide just to play this game. But speaking of guides, another major aspect I want to hit on real quick is actually the completion rate percentage. It's displayed to the top right of the overworld map. If you want to get 100% on this game, you need to talk to almost all the NPCs, pick the correct dialogue choices. Oh yeah, you do have dialogue choices in this game, which is kind of cool, but you know, complete some of the very difficult tasks during which you may only have 1 opportunity to do it, do things in a correct order, and of course complete all the side content of the game. Without a guide from the very beginning of this game, this is almost impossible. So if you want to go in blind with your first playthrough and just make decisions how you want versus the ones that you need in order to get 100%, you can't get the 100%. Some people may like this because it makes you play through the game again, being more attentive and everything. But my idea of it is, if you're going to spend that much time in a playthrough and you get to, let's say, 80-some%, you should be able to finish it by doing whatever other tasks that you haven't done to get that 100%. In order to get the 100% here, you have to do another playthrough. There's no other choice. I would be okay with this, and I think this is kind of cool if the game was like really fun, but it's not. So all those mini games that are not fun, you have to play through them again, and you have to do them in a certain way. And if you screw up at any point of the run, you have to restart the run to get that 100%, or just load a previous save. You want to be careful. But in terms of progression, like talking about the progression of the game, what I think is even worse than this is actually some of the items and equipment are hidden behind these mini games or chapters or decision choices or obscure areas and so forth. So it's like really difficult to find some some of the good items that you need. But in order to talk about the equipment and the item problem, I first need to talk about the battle system. The battle system. Again, I think majority of this game is not fun, but the battle system is actually a ton of fun. And Final Fantasy X-2's battle system is completely different than Final Fantasy X's battle system, which for Final Fantasy X, I still think it's one of the best turn-based Final Fantasy battle systems of all time. But this battle system in particular is actually probably in one of my top 3 positions of all battle systems in Final Fantasy titles. But how does it work? Well, essentially, it's just a really fast turn-based ATB battle system. And in battles, you can actually switch between jobs pretty seamlessly between the 3 main characters. And the job classes are tied to these things called dress spheres that I mentioned earlier, actually. And again, you really can't just change them on the fly with only the cost of an ATB gauge. There are, of course, your standard job classes, and you actually start off with some of these, but then as you progress through the game and you do certain tasks to unlock the more unique ones, to switch up the combat formula a little bit more, the game becomes significantly diverse, and some of these later ones are actually necessary for the late game, but more on that later. But for now, let me actually talk about the transformation animations of these dress spheres, because these are cool. There are 17 dress spheres in Final Fantasy X-2, and not only do they all have their own unique changing animations, but each of the main character's transformation also has a little bit different animation than the other 2 as well. And of course, each of the dress spheres have their own designs, and they all look great. And I think all of the animations along with the designs are very, very well done and interesting. This is really cool and fun, and I really enjoyed watching these transformations almost every time. Alright, now back to the combat system. The things that make this system so fun is that you're actually in control of all 3 of the main characters, Yuna, Riku, and Pain. For each of these characters, you can put in individual commands that are fairly quick because the speed of the ATB gauge is really fast. This is one of the most hectic battle systems I've ever played. So therefore, battles are actually hectic, they're extremely engaging, and in my opinion, a ton of fun. It's a huge adjustment from the prior title, where basically you have all the time in the world to make a decision. And it's even more emphasized here to make the appropriate quick combat decision, because the enemies also have their own ATB gauge, which you can't see, so if you wait too long, the enemy actually gets an extra attack on you and makes things much more difficult for you to actually come out victorious in this. Another major part of the battle system is actually setting up your party for the battles. Before a battle, you can enter the menu and edit your dress spheres for each character individually and change up what they have available during battle. Again, these dress spheres are like job classes, but with these dress spheres, you put them on a garment grid, which is basically just a grid that houses them, and it has a certain number of slots, and you have to use that grid in battle once it's equipped. Therefore, if you have a garment grid that only has 3 slots, you can only have 3 different dress spheres available to you during battle. This sounds like a simple problem though. Why not just equip a garment grid that has a ton of dress sphere slots in? Well, you may not want to do that for a few reasons actually. In order to change from one dress sphere to the next, the dress sphere that you're changing to has to be adjacent to the dress sphere that you're already on. Therefore, if you have a dress sphere that's 2 dress sphere slots away from the dress sphere that you're actually on right now, then you have to first change to the adjacent one and then to the desired one. If you pick a garment grid that has a ton of slots, you have a lot of availability of different options in combat, but it might be very difficult just to get from the dress sphere that you're on now to the desired dress sphere. But also, there's an advantage to changing to every dress sphere in your garment grid as well, and that of course is the special dress sphere. The special dress sphere is essentially an overdrive, and in order to get this, you have to cycle through all of the dress spheres in your garment grid. Once you do that, you can activate the special dress sphere, and the other 2 characters will leave the battlefield, and 2 companion pieces specifically for that special dress sphere will accompany the character that is in the special dress sphere. So if you want to use the special dress sphere often, it's much easier to gain access to it if you have a garment grid that only has a few dress sphere slots. This allows you to cycle through it quicker. However, the obvious problem is you have less dress spheres to pick from. But these special dress spheres are very powerful and a ton of fun to use. And also, each character has a pretty significantly different special dress sphere than the other 2, which really adds a lot of variety and utility in combat, and honestly has a lot of fun to it as well. But on top of all of this, some of the garment grids also have special bonuses for switching between certain dress spheres, like casting Kiraga for instance, when you switch between one to another, becoming immune to silence, and then also like doubling your HP. So this may also significantly influence your choice of the garment grid that you use, and more importantly, where you place your dress spheres within that garment grid. Another important part of combat is actually how you unlock certain abilities within the dress spheres. When you get a new dress sphere, you have a percentage by it that represents how many abilities you've unlocked within that dress sphere. Almost always it's a very low percentage when you first get the dress sphere, and that's just basically because you only have the basic moves unlocked. But in order to gain more abilities with that dress sphere, you have to use that dress sphere and gain AP points while you're using it. You get these points by defeating enemies or landing dress sphere specific moves in battle, and some various other obscure things. And within the menu, you can choose what ability you're trying to unlock within the list of abilities that are unlockable, so you can focus on exactly what you want at that specific time. To me, the system of unlocking new abilities is actually pretty awesome and a ton of fun, and it made me pick up certain dress spheres and level them up in order to gain certain abilities that would be beneficial towards certain enemies or beneficial for grinding or something of the sort. So it also kind of, in a roundabout way, influences different types of playstyles, so that's pretty cool too. But I do think there's a pretty considerable problem with the dress spheres as a whole, so let's talk about that next. The balance, equipment system, pacing, and difficulty. The dress spheres I think are great, and they really add a lot to the combat system. However, there are clearly a handful or less of really useful dress spheres, and the rest are definitely within a second class level by a pretty far shot. And actually one dress sphere far outshines the rest, in my opinion. By the end of the game, I only really used 3 dress spheres, and those were, of course, the Gun Mage, the White Mage, and the Berserker. The Gun Mage is just a very powerful ranged option and has special abilities that do a huge amount of damage to certain types of enemies as well. And when you unlock 100% of the normal abilities of the dress sphere, this becomes a great option for clearing out normal enemy fights. Plus, the use of abilities and attacks within this dress sphere are also really quick. So for me, this is the best dress sphere by far, and it's just very versatile and a good all-rounder for the end game, and really the whole game. The White Mage, of course, is your healing class, which is necessary for keeping your party alive after taking a ton of damage, or just taking a little bit of damage over a significant period of time, or getting afflicted with some status element. You get this dress sphere really early on, and unlike most other dress spheres that you get early on, this dress sphere stays very relevant throughout the entire game. The Berserker dress sphere is actually just a powerhouse and does a ton of physical damage. It's relatively quick and has a ton of HP. So it's a powerhouse hitter, a tank, and it's just really quick. It also has the ability Berserk, which throws the character in command into a Berserk status, which basically just has the character consistently attacking without being able to influence the character one way or another until the Berserk status is gone, which typically is a negative thing, but for this class it actually almost acts as an auto battle option, which is kind of cool. So this one's really good just for being a tank and hitting hard. These 3 dress spheres are the best dress spheres you have available to you in a reasonable sense. There are other dress spheres that may be more powerful when you have more money or more items or etc., but they're all pretty hard to get and they're really late in the game. Again, there's 17 in total, but by far a majority of them are just really not viable by the end of the game. This wouldn't be a big deal, but every dress sphere is supposed to represent a different style of gameplay, so this kind of sucks. But all of them are really cool and I really enjoyed using them, but to me this just feels really unbalanced and that just kind of sucks. But what's also kind of unbalanced is the equipment system as well. So let me quickly explain how the equipment system works. Each character has 2 accessory slots where you can equip various different accessories and add bonuses to combat. So an example would be like adding 40% more HP, 40% more MP, making the character fireproof, berserk proof, etc. And that's it. That's the equipment system. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing though, because this does allow for the dress spheres and the garment grids to take precedence in the battle system, which is already a lot. However, the accessories essentially just get better as the game goes on. For instance, you'll start off with like 20% more HP, then 40% more HP, then 60, then 80, then 100, things of that nature. However, there are some really useful accessories that kind of throw out some of the other accessories. One, for instance, allowed me to get into the final boss area 25 levels underpowered, and that's the accessory that negates MP usage. So you throw that on, and that's in that slot permanently pretty much. But speaking of going to the final boss area 25 levels underpowered, you may be asking yourself, Chance, why would you do this? And the answer to this is, well, I didn't mean to, it just kind of happened. I think this presents a real problem in the game, that being the pacing of it and the difficulty of it. From the beginning, the game is like kind of difficult, which I like. I think that's good. But there's a huge difficulty spike in the last 1/5 of the game, the 5th chapter. And within that chapter, there's a decent spike at the beginning that's manageable, and there's a huge spike at the end. I played through most of the chapters, completing majority of, if not all of the side content in order to obtain certain dress spheres and get certain equipment, etc. And also to be the appropriate level. Oh yeah, leveling in this game essentially just raises your base stats. Each dress sphere has an additional multiplier to it. So when I say the Berserker has a lot of HP, it's not that it has a lot of HP, it has a huge multiplier to your base HP. But yeah, essentially as you level up, you just level up these base stats, and that's about it. The recommended base level on the objective resource of Reddit is somewhere between 65 to 70 levels. Again, I completed most of the side content in the prior 4 chapters, visited all of the world map sites in every chapter, and even grinded a little bit in certain spots I got stuck in because I felt that it was a little bit too difficult and I was sick of getting one shot by a lot of enemies. I came into the final area at around level 40. This is 25 to 30 levels under the recommended level. I was almost halfway to where I was supposed to be. To me, that's insane and really bad pacing. However, the challenge of fighting through the final area underpowered was a ton of fun, but I did end up getting stuck at the final boss because he was just basically one-shotting me. After going through all the sucky mini games and quests, etc., I was legit ready to give up at this point, and I kind of did. I put the game down didn't touch it, started writing the script with the intent of not completing this game. However, the last section of the game was actually pretty fun because it was mostly based on battling. So after a few days, I picked it back up and said, you know what, I'll give it one more shot. But I knew in order to complete the last section, I would need to get up to this level. So again, I went to the insightful source of Reddit and looked up some powering level spots and looked up what I needed in order to power level. And this whole journey to get to this level was actually my favorite part of the game. So let me tell you about it real quick. Again, after getting stuck, I picked the game back up, and I knew I needed to find the most efficient way to get the maximum amount of experience possible in order to level up as fast as possible. So what I found was that there was a dress sphere that I didn't have, actually doubles the amount of experience points that you get after battle. The reason I didn't have this is in order to get it, you have to beat a very hard opponent in a mini game known as Sphere Break. This is the multiplier one that I actually mentioned earlier, and come to find out, it's actually a fairly in-depth mini game and has a ton of mechanics and does get really difficult. But honestly, it's kind of fun, so I didn't mind doing this again. But the reason I didn't have this is because when I faced the opponent the first time in chapter 3, I was already sick of the mini games. I didn't want to learn the new mechanics of this mini game. I just kind of powered through it and got through this section in order to complete it. However, I was determined to beat this guy to get the double XP dress sphere. So this time in chapter 5, I looked up where to find this guy because it's not in the same spot, of course. I relearned the mechanics of the mini game, or actually, you know what, I just learned them for the first time. I didn't really learn them the first time. Challenged the opponent several times and lost, but then I finally beat him and got the dress sphere. I then took it to a nice grinding spot, grinding out the ability to gain double experience points, which yeah, you have to unlock that first. And then I power leveled up to around level 70 or so before challenging the final boss again. But honestly, that whole experience was pretty fun, and then completing the game was fun, so that honestly was my favorite part of the game. But again, this whole situation harken back to the main problem that I have with the game, which is the game focusing in on everything but battling, which is really a pacing issue. I genuinely think majority of the mini games in this game suck, and I'd say about 75% of this game's content is locked behind these mini games. So since majority of the game is these sucky mini games and not battling, I don't think the game is that good. But the last chapter, chapter 5, is almost all battling, which is wonderful. But again, it's chapter 5 out of 5. I really only thoroughly enjoyed this game during this last chapter. So again, it's just really bad pacing. But what's also really bad pacing is actually how you get dress spheres. So let me explain. There's 17 dress spheres again in total. You immediately get some, and you get some through completing the main story. But some of the other dress spheres, ones that are really good, are locked behind side mini games that are just tough to get through, difficulty-wise and mentally. Or they're hidden in very obscure areas in specific chapters or something of that nature. It's difficult to get them. I think one of the great aspects about having this battle system and having the garment grids and the dress spheres and everything around that is having the availability to set up a garment grid with dress spheres that you want. But if you don't have the dress spheres that you want, you don't know how to get them, or you've already locked yourself out of getting them, this takes a lot away from this battle system. Again, I do truly think the Berserker, the Gun Mage, and the White Mage are some of the best dress spheres that you can have, and they're not particularly difficult to get. But if you miss these, or you missed another powerful dress sphere, or you want to play with a certain type of dress sphere and you've already locked yourself out of it, that just really sucks because you have to start a new playthrough if you want to get that. So that is just very much not chill. But you know what's also not chill about this game? The characters and the story. Spoilers. For Final Fantasy X-2, there's a lot of returning characters from Final Fantasy X. And actually, two of the main characters are two of the main characters from Final Fantasy X, Yuna and Riku. But they're both a little bit different. Both are more lively and goofy, and Riku's actually extremely goofy. On top of this, Riku's brother, who's just named Brother, was very stoic and almost a silent character in Final Fantasy X. However, here in Final Fantasy X-2, he's just a clown, like an absolute buffoon. At times it's funny, so it's kind of whatever, I guess. But the third main party member is Pain, which is actually somebody new this game. But the question is, who is she? No, for real, like, who is she? I don't really know. I mean, the game doesn't really tell you till the end, and then when it does, it doesn't explain a whole lot. But in general, she's a stoic, badass female archetype. And she's also a goth girl, so that's, that's always a plus. Speaking of that, let me do a little blurb about the characters' designs real quick. There's clearly an emphasis on making this game more sexually appealing in terms of the female characters, which really wasn't emphasized in the prior title. For the most part, there's exceptions. But in general, I'm about the fan service. And in all honesty, I think the designs of these characters and the dress spheres that they put on and some of the new enemies is really done very well and fits into the world of Spira nicely. Okay, now back to the characters. There are also a few new characters, and honestly, they're all really good, just goofy. The rest are returning characters, again, mostly from Final Fantasy X. But again, that's just, they got goofiness all over them. But this is more of a tone thing, and I don't really mind it. Like, it's okay, I just don't think it's executed well. So overall, I like the characters, but what I just didn't like was the story and how it was told. So let's talk about that. Alright, this is the heavy spoiler section, so spoiler time. Final Fantasy X-2 has to be one of the dumbest stories I've ever experienced in gaming. And it's like the bad dumb, not the dumb fun. To summarize it, basically, Yuna's sad because Titus is not alive, which that part isn't dumb, it actually makes a lot of sense. But then somehow Riku finds a sphere with a character on it that kind of looks like Titus, and now Yuna, Riku, and this new character Pain form the Gull Wings, and now they're sphere hunters, and they're traveling throughout Spira to find out more information about this new mysterious character. And if it wasn't just boiled down to just some dude that looked like Titus a long time ago, trying to revive his dead girlfriend that was killed along with him, oh yeah, he's also dead. Now his and her spirit are kind of trapped, and her spirit's trapped in Yuna's dress sphere that she uses for her J-pop idol band, and with this dude activating a machine of mass destruction in the hopes of that reviving her. If it didn't just boil down to that premise, I'd say it's not a bad setup. But this dude who's known as Shinyu, I think it's Shinyu, right? But this dude Shinyu that looks like Titus, and also the girl that's inhabiting Yuna's dress sphere, which is Lin, Shinyu's girlfriend. Not only does Yuna see this dude that looks like Titus, but this dude also sees her and she looks like Lin because Lin's attached to her dress sphere. Like, the level of disbelief that you have to disregard is just crazy at this point. And it's dumb. It's just dumb. There's so many directions that they could have went with a sequel to Final Fantasy X. Could have been very interesting, but this direction just seems like such a waste. And I know it gets even worse with the novella that was released later as a sequel to this game, but we won't get into that. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded a story being super simple and just dumb fun, and the focus primarily being on just seeing how the world is rebuilding and how some of the other characters from Final Fantasy X are dealing with some crazy shenanigans and the world rebuilding as a whole, which is kind of the secondary plot of the story, and that part is interesting. But this primary plot that kind of drives the whole story, just dumb. It's just dumb. But again, some of the parts of the story I did really enjoy. Specifically, the whole Wakka and Lulu segments. In quick summary with that, Wakka and Lulu end up getting together. Surprise, surprise. They end up having a baby, which is also kind of neat. And then also, Wakka kind of addresses his racism towards Albed, and actually apologizes to Riku in Albed, showing great character development, even more so than what he had in Final Fantasy X. And then seeing what Kamari's up to is also interesting. And the new character, LeBlanc, her storyline was dumb for sure, but it was fun. But everything else could have been good story points. I think they just really dropped the ball with the writing and delivery. I could see what they're trying to do with these certain sections, which would have been really cool, but by the end, the execution was just overall not very good. But again, there is some great stuff to this game. I know I'm ragging on it pretty hard, but there are some cool moments here. And there are some other things about the game that are also really good. And I just want to do a really quick little blurb about it and not do a whole section, so let me hop into that real quick. The music in this game is actually really good. I'd say it's actually almost on par with Final Fantasy X soundtrack. There's also a significant visual upgrade from the prior title, primarily in character designs and animations, which is also awesome. And on top of this, when you're in battle, there's a lot of quips and animations that are specific for each dress sphere and each character in each dress sphere. And it's just, there's a lot of work in that, and that's cool. That's cool fan service, you know? The Fiend Arena is also really cool. It's a good time for battling. The monster catching system it's alright. And it does add a different element to battling if you want to partake in it. So that's neat. And there's also a New Game Plus mode, which is always a good addition, so cheers to that. But yeah, other than that, I think that the story and the execution of it is just bad. Conclusion. Final Fantasy X-2 is the sequel to the masterpiece that is, of course, Final Fantasy X, but it's so much different than the predecessor, and it's really hard to even compare the two. Final Fantasy X-2 is intended to be a dumb fun ride with serious moments sprinkled in there and a more open adventure with a more active battle system. It is indeed more open, and it does have a more active battle system, but it's more dumb than it is fun. The music, the visuals, the character designs, the animations, and the battle system are all very wonderful. The battle system is actually one of my favorite Final Fantasy battle systems, and it was a ton of fun playing it throughout the game, but you don't do much of that throughout this game. Instead, I'd say about 75% of this game is actually not battling, and it's doing these mini games or tasks that are essentially just extra mini games, most of which are either pretty boring or very unfun or really both. A lot of very useful items, equipment, dress spheres, garment grids, etc. are either extremely obscure and hard to come by or locked behind some unfun mini games or tasks. The story is really dumb as a whole, with moments that are actually kind of cool and enjoyable, but again, these are just moments. There's a soft gate in the beginning of the last 20% of the game, and then there's a hard gate, and I'd say about the last 2% of the game, which typically requires hours of grinding in order to be competitive in these final areas. So much of this game is very, very obscure and unintuitive. And without a guide, you'll be running around trying to figure out what to do for potentially hours for a simple solution. So a guide is thoroughly recommended for this game. Therefore, although the battle system is wonderful, the music is incredible, and character designs and animations are stunning even today, they definitely look a little bit dated, but the creativity here is just awesome. I would still have a hard time recommending this game due to all the issues that I listed just a minute ago, and also for the fact that it's definitely a non-essential Final Fantasy story. In fact, a lot of people choose not to believe that it actually is canon. But if you're a Final Fantasy diehard, and you just want more from the Final Fantasy X universe, and since you probably already have the game, if you own the HD version of Final Fantasy X, give it a shot and see what you think. This was not a game for me, but I see what they were trying to do with this game, and I genuinely think that it has a really innovative and fun battle system, so I really understand why people love this game, but again, just not for me. If you liked the video and you want to see more like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit the bell notification. That way you don't miss out on any future videos. And leave a comment and tell me what you thought about the video or what you'd like to see me do next. Again, thank you for all the support. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I love seeing what y'all think about the video and your opinions of the video or the game in the comments. I think I'm going to do something a little different or do a video on a different type of game for the next one, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you want to help support the channel further, consider becoming a member and get some extra loyalty badges, emojis for comments, and a shout out in my next video. If not, all good. I just appreciate you watching the video up to this point and all of your support. But until the next video, I wish you all the very best and hope you enjoyed. Bye bye.